The winter evening wrapped around the city like a cold embrace, snowflakes dancing in the amber glow of streetlights. At 35, Michael Chen had grown accustomed to the comfort of his heated BMW as he navigated the familiar route home from his downtown office as CEO of a thriving pharmaceutical company. His days were filled with boardroom meetings and million-dollar decisions. But tonight, something would change the course of his carefully ordered life. Through the swirling snow, he noticed a figure huddled at the bus stop ahead. A young woman sat alone on the bench, her shoulders hunched against the bitter cold. She wore a light blue winter coat that seemed far too thin for the harsh weather, and her reddish-brown hair was tucked up in a neat bun beneath a burgundy knit cap. Even from a distance, Michael could see she was shivering. Something about her posture spoke of quiet endurance, the kind of strength his own mother had possessed during those difficult years when she worked double shifts as a seamstress to keep their family afloat. Michael slowed his car, pulled over to the curb, and rolled down his passenger window. "Excuse me," he called out gently. "Are you waiting for the bus?" The young woman looked up, startled. Her face was flushed from the cold, and Michael could see she was probably in her early 20s, with auburn hair pulled back and kind eyes that held a mixture of weariness and determination. She wore hospital scrubs beneath her coat, and a name badge caught the streetlight's glow. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible over the wind. "But I think the buses might be delayed because of the storm." Michael studied her for a moment. Everything about her spoke of someone who worked in healthcare, someone who spent her days caring for others. There was a gentle strength in her demeanor that reminded him of the nurses who had tended to his father during his final days in the hospital. "How long have you been waiting?" Michael asked, concerned by how pale she looked. "About an hour," she admitted, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. "My car broke down this morning and I had to take the bus to work. The evening routes are always less frequent." Without hesitation, Michael put his car in park and stepped out into the swirling snow. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark wavy hair dusted with snowflakes, wearing a long charcoal wool coat that spoke of quality and success, but his expression was one of genuine concern, not the calculated politeness of a businessman. "I'm Michael," he said, extending his gloved hand. "And you're coming with me. This weather is too dangerous to be sitting out here." The young woman hesitated, and Michael could see the internal debate playing out on her face. She'd been taught to be cautious of strangers, but something in his manner seemed to put her at ease. "I'm Rebecca," she said finally. "Rebecca Martinez. I'm a nurse at General Hospital." She paused, then added with a small smile, "And I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble at all," Michael replied warmly. "My mother always taught me that we take care of each other during storms. Where do you live?" As Rebecca gave him directions to her apartment across town, Michael opened the passenger door of his BMW and waited patiently as she gathered her small purse and the thermos. She'd been clutching for warmth. Once she was settled in the heated interior, he could see her shoulders finally begin to relax. "This is very kind of you," Rebecca said as they pulled into traffic. "I was starting to worry I'd be there all night." Michael glanced at her in the rearview mirror, noting how the warmth was bringing color back to her cheeks. "What kind of nursing do you do?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Pediatric oncology," Rebecca answered quietly. "I work with children who have cancer." Something in Michael's chest tightened. Of all the specialties she could have chosen, she dedicated her life to caring for sick children. It was perhaps the most emotionally demanding field in medicine, requiring not just skill, but an enormous capacity for compassion. That must be incredibly difficult work, he said softly. Rebecca nodded, looking out at the snow-covered streets. It is, but it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Those kids, they have such courage. They teach me something new every day about what really matters in life. As they drove through the quiet city streets, Rebecca found herself sharing more than she usually would with a stranger. There was something about Michael's presence that felt safe, trustworthy. He listened without judgment as she talked about her patients, her dreams of eventually becoming a nurse practitioner, and the challenges of working in a field where the stakes were always so high. Michael, in turn, found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told her about his company's work developing treatments for rare diseases, about his father's battle with illness, and about how meeting the nurses who cared for his father had changed his perspective on what constituted meaningful work. My father used to say that the true measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they give away. Michael said as they neared Rebecca's neighborhood. I think he would have admired what you do. When they reached Rebecca's modest apartment building, Michael insisted on walking her to the door. The snow had intensified, and he wanted to make sure she made it safely inside. Thank you, Rebecca said, as they stood under the small overhang by her building's entrance. This was incredibly kind of you. I don't know how to repay you. Michael shook his head. No repayment necessary, but I wonder, would you allow me to take you to dinner sometime? I'd like to continue our conversation. Rebecca studied his face in the soft glow of the porch light. There was sincerity in his eyes, and something else, a kind of loneliness that she recognized. Despite their different circumstances, she sensed they were both people who had built their lives around caring for others, sometimes at the expense of caring for themselves. I'd like that, she said simply. 3 months later, as spring began to warm the city, Michael and Rebecca had discovered that their chance meeting in the snow had been the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Their dinner dates had become regular occurrences, and Michael found himself looking forward to Rebecca's stories about her young patients with an anticipation that surprised him. Rebecca, meanwhile, had come to see past Michael's success to the man beneath someone who used his resources not for personal gain, but to make treatments more accessible to those who needed them most. When she learned that his company had quietly funded the new children's wing at her hospital, she understood that his generosity was not an exception, but a way of life. On a warm evening in April, as they walked through the park, where they'd begun meeting regularly, Michael stopped by the same bench where they'd shared their first real conversation. Rebecca, he said, taking her hands in his, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You reminded me that success isn't about what you build, but about the connections you make along the way. Rebecca smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You changed my life too, Michael. You showed me that kindness isn't just something we do for patients or strangers. It's something we can offer each other every single day. As they stood together in the evening light, both understood that their story had begun with a simple act of compassion on a snowy night. Michael's decision to stop and offer help to a shivering nurse had led to something far more profound than either could have imagined. Sometimes they both realized the most important moments in life begin with the smallest gestures of human kindness. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, those moments grow into something that warms us for the rest of our lives. The city lights twinkled around them as they walked home together. No longer strangers brought together by chance, but two souls who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for.